Welcome back, everyone, to the Heart and Science of Creative Leadership podcast. My name is Bill Coletti, and as always, I'm joined by my amazing co-host, Aarti Shah. Aarti, how are you today?
Oh, I'm good. It's feeling like summer. I think everyone's under a heat dome.
Absolutely. It is certainly hot. It's certainly hot. And speaking of hot, we have one of our better episodes. So we have got a dear friend of mine and someone that you've certainly known the agency over the years, Andrew Bleeker. And Andrew Bleeker, for those of you that don't know him, is the CEO and founder of Bully Pulpit Media. 2008, he was generally regarded as one of the innovators of all of the amazing digital work that the Obama for President campaign did in that year. He then founded his firm. His firm then got swept up into Hill and Knowlton, and that's where he and I got to work together, was at Hill and Knowlton. And then about 10 years ago, he exited that and did his own thing. And he's now at about 250 people, footprint in the United States, footprint in Europe, and really grown into an amazing firm. And I think, Aarti, as you've observed and seen him and seen the firm, you've been able to shape sort of your own opinion. I've got a friendship and a fondness for Andrew as a leader, but you've sort of seen him as an innovator in the industry.
Yeah. I mean, so, what's interesting about a lot of these folks from the Obama campaign in 2008, right? I mean, at the time, it was really groundbreaking, especially their digital game. And what's been interesting to note is how so many of them, on top of Andrew, some folks or today his competitors, like Teddy Goff and the team at Precision, that how they all sort of went and sort of did their own thing. And we'll talk a little bit about, while what they did in 2008 was innovative, it's kind of table stakes today. So like how do you stay fresh? How do you stay relevant if you're a pioneer and that's the impetus for starting your own agency? How do you make sure that you stay on the cutting edge? Especially, it's been, oh my gosh, almost, and 2028 will be 20 years since Obama was elected.
Imagine sort of Kennedy 60 and Reagan 80, just for context. I mean, it's kind of almost like those feel like black and white or analog and digital or black and white and color campaigns. And that's how we're going to be for 2008 to 2028.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
So it's great. It's a great, well, I mean, I was alive for one of those and not for the other. So yeah, no, it's a great conversation. I think Andrew, brings such a great perspective that I don't think we've really had yet on the show.
No, it was really good. We'll talk more about what he's going to share here in just a second. But let's do heartbeats and science experiments. Aarti, what are your heartbeats and science experiments for this week?
Okay, so my heartbeat was I was at Barnes & Noble's and I stumbled upon the new David Brooks book, How to Know a Person. And I just started flipping through it and it's on my list now of books to read because he brought up this concept of the diminisher and the illuminator, right? And so a diminisher is someone who, as you can imagine, makes people feel small and unseen. Their relationships tend to be really transactional. They tend to rely on stereotypes and sort of ignore whatever doesn't fit into their preconceived notions. We can all imagine the kind of both friend and leader and colleague a diminisher probably is. And then you have illuminators, and illuminators are people who shine, sort of help other people sort of shine, right? Sort of help their brightness be seen. They tend to make people feel lit up. They help people feel bigger, deeper, respected, seen, really. Part of it's being intentional about asking questions, about listening, about actually processing what you're hearing, right? And I had a thought. So at first I thought, well, we should encourage leaders to make sure that they're illuminators and not diminishers. But here's my sort of meta question. If you are naturally a diminisher, if that's just sort of how you're built and wired, and if you're only cosplaying an illuminator because it makes you a better leader, doesn't that make you a diminisher still, right? I mean, it feels like this is something that you either, it's like almost a values driven thing than it is a behavior thing, right? Yeah. So if you're taking on the attributes of a illuminator just because you're like, oh, I'll be a better leader that way, I'll have a more engaged team, that would still make you a diminisher because it's just transactional.
Yeah, it is. In the book, is diminisher clearly a negative? Or are there any positive attributes of the diminisher?
I have not read the whole
Didn't
book
find
yet.
it.
This is from me thumbing through
Yeah,
the book a
sure.
little
But it
bit
doesn't
at
seem like
Barnes and
there's
Nobles.
many the way you described it.
It didn't seem like it. I mean, because the title of the book is right, How to Know a Person, right? And
Yeah.
if your intent is to know people, like truly know them, make them feel seen, then I think as a diminisher, I don't know that there is a path to do that.
Interesting. Yeah, I look forward to checking it out. I mean, I loved his other book, Second Mountain. It's really shaped a lot of my thinking. But even in there, his dichotomies are so black and white that you really can't ever default back to the other, because he makes it so clear, like, well, I sure as hell don't want to be one of those. I got to be one of these.
That's a great point, because we do exist on, I think everybody exists on sort of a spectrum, right?
Like, I mean, I don't think
exactly. And I do think that some people are wired to be diminishers. There are people that just have a really hard time, like, experiencing nuance, right? And actually, when I saw this, me and my husband were talking about everybody so many people we know, and so many are just staunchly in the diminisher camp. On others, I think, and the ones that you tend to have deeper friendships with, or at least for me, tend to be on the illuminator side. But I don't know that the people that that I would identify as diminishers have much room for change. So hopefully, so to your point, hopefully there are, hopefully it's not just a net negative.
Yeah. And maybe, and again, I've not read it. I'm going off of what you've shared and a little bit I read in the New York Times. We have stoic people in our lives that are not overly generous with their emotions, and they're very level and they're even keeled. But when rubber meets the road, those are some really valuable friends. They don't sugarcoat. They really speak truth to power. I don't know in this sort of illuminator diminisher, that would a stoic, someone who just doesn't, not particularly warm or generous, but still a very good person, would they get labeled as a diminisher?
Yes, possibly. That wasn't my understanding of it. It's not really how gregarious are you, how extroverted are you when you walk into a room. It's more, do you listen? Do you hear what people say? Are you able to reflect back to them, like what they're actually saying, versus filtering it through your own lens constantly and saying, well, you said this, but no, actually the truth, I think it's really more about being a deep listener and being able to reflect back to people so that they feel seen, right? It's less about how you're showing up and more about how you're able to be a mirror to other people accurately, is my understanding.
That's awesome. Awesome. What else you got?
So my experiment for the week is I read a Harvard business, or not Harvard, it's Harvard Medical School study from 2021 that, interestingly, our metabolism stays relatively stable from the ages 20 to 60. So apparently the big takeaway was we can't blame age on middle age spread. The problem is we do get more sedentary as we get older, and obviously, places that people store fat changes and all of that. But anyway, the bottom line was that we just have to be more mindful about staying active. And I'm relatively active, so I was like, yeah, that doesn't apply to me. But I decided as an experiment to just see how many steps I was getting. And once I was intentional about getting 10,000 steps a day, I noticed everything changed. I just was sleeping better, and just my overall energy was actually up, not down. So it's my experiment for everybody. Don't blame metabolism. Just take a moment and say, am I really as active as I used to be?
I love
that's
that.
my, yes.
I love that. So I switched to the stand-up desk, and we've maybe chatted about that in the past. And so I love it. I love that sort of sense of dynamism and energy. So let me pivot off of that. I'll do my experiment, and then I'll go back over to my heartbeat. So my experiment is intermittent fasting, same zone.
Yes.
But also, so I've always kind of been an intermittent faster, where I typically don't have my first meal of the day until probably noon or 1, 11 and 1, between 11 and 1. It depends on what I've done early in the morning. And then try to finish my last meal by 7. So that makes a feeding window from roughly noon to 7. But what I've now added in now is a 24-hour fast, trying to do a 24-hour fast and just not eating what would be those 2 last meals between noon and 7, not doing that. My timing's a little off because my 24 really becomes more like 30. And so that's a challenge. But yeah, I love fasting. I thought fasting has been really, I love the energy that you get from fasting.
So how do you find that you get hangry? How's your mood reflect?
Supplement a lot with water, supplement a lot with, carbonated water, certainly for a feeling. You get a little bit of an energy dip, but not, I find that I'm so much more clear. not weighed down by a big meal. Portion size might be another way to do this as opposed to doing what I'm doing. But it's an experiment to see what it's like. I've done 3-day fasts before that are really quite, I wouldn't say I enjoy them. That's hard to say that you enjoy them. But there is a metabolic change that you absolutely feel, and it feels pretty cool.
Can I ask you one follow-up question on this? What about socializing, right? Because I think even not your fast days, on your 7 p.m. Cutoff days, like, right, you're meeting friends for dinner at 7. How do you manage that?
Tough. You'd manage it. You got to manage it. You just, you try to go out with more of your elderly friends that want to eat.
Yes. 5 o'clock early bird special.
Absolutely. And there's a couple of buddies of ours that we've actually kidded about that, and we like it. It's easier to get a reservation and maybe a little bit cheaper. But I wouldn't say I'm as hard over as some of my other friends that are like, no, we're never going to eat past 8. But I feel it and don't like it when I do it, and don't have that 3 hours of not eating, certainly before bed. Because I try to get to bed by like 9:30 or 10, which means I got to shut her down by 7. And so that's early. Wow,
we're sounds like we're both sort of on these little like wellness journeys.
Exactly. Yes. And so my heartbeat is the morning that we're recording this. My wife had a very minor surgery on her hand. She had an injury and got an infection that required to get just dealt with and just cleaned out. So she cleaned it out and it was good. And I was thinking about this. My heartbeat is just the attentiveness of care when a loved one is having a medical procedure. It's so beautiful and wonderful that it's all laser focused on them, because you can get out of phone calls, you can get out of appointments. It's like the get out of jail free, because it's just a moment in time for that heartbeat of that person to just be fully present. And it could be a little clean up an infection or an emergency type of thing. Yeah. But it requires, and I know you've had this certainly with your husband and your son, is that you're just present. Everything else falls by the wayside. Yes. It's really nice. Yes. It's nice that it happens.
Yeah, no, it is. And on the other end of it, you realize sort of how nice it was to be so singularly focused on someone else for some period of time. So, first, best wishes for a speedy recovery. It's a 1-inch injury with like a 10-inch cast. So it's kind of ridiculous. Yeah.
Yes, but it all came from that sort of little accident she had. But it's all good now. All right, well, let's get on with Andrew and the conversation we're having. So a handful of things that I thought were really valuable. And Aarti, I'd love to get you just to sort of supplement and comment on these. You know, one that's certainly close to my heart is this context of being in a campaign, having been in campaigns, and how that pulls through into an agency. Obviously, that is my clear bias, and I went to hire for that when I was hiring at H&K and hiring at Public Strategies, people with campaign experience at the exclusion of journalists and at the exclusion of people that kind of grew up in an agency. So that was one big take that I thought was really interesting. We visited about for a few minutes.
Yeah, and I would say, listen out for why folks from campaigns make great hires, about Andrew's philosophy around expansion, around building versus buying. I would also listen out for what he has to say about DEI. I think that was really interesting. And folks might be surprised at what he thinks makes for a good leader. So I'm going to tease everybody with that's what they should listen for.
We just hope you don't get bored by that section. So it's a great conversation with Andrew. He's a fabulous friend, a fabulous leader. He's got a terrific firm. Hope you enjoy the conversation we had with Andrew Bleeker. Andrew, welcome. We are glad you're here. When Aarti and I first thought about pulling together this podcast, we were listing who are the entrepreneurs that I want to talk to, and you were obviously on the list. So I'm really glad to have the conversation and talk with you about BPI, but also talk with you about kind of your journey as an entrepreneur. So we're really glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you both.
So let's just start right at the top. How are you defining success? What does success mean for you, both professionally and personally?
I don't think success is some line in the sand. It's not like we ever set out to be a certain number of people. In fact, I'd prefer to, usually most days, prefer to be fewer people.
How big's your headcount? How many are you right now for headcount?
We're about 250,
250.
About 200 here in the States and then 50 in Europe, which is both like too big and far too small for the kind of work we want to do at the same time. No, success for us is sort of one day at a time. It's are we winning the kind of clients we want? Are we doing the kind of work we want to do? Do we feel like we're actually delivering on the promises we make? And can we? Is that work interesting enough to attract and retain, this amazing team we've been able to put together and to keep building on it? And it's a balance every day, but that's you can't get too much further in the future than that, I don't think.
And is your definition too far removed from that, or do you personally kind of hold yourself to that same account for success?
Yeah, my only difference is I also have a wife and 2 kids, and I gotta we have to balance. I want to see them too, and so there's a little bit of doing well while doing good, right? And that we want to also work on things that matter, that we want to have an impact. It's more exciting. It attracts a higher caliber of people. And frankly, if I'm going to be away from home or I'm going to be traveling, I'd rather be able to tell them why.
Yeah. So I want to, by the way, that the work-life balance question that's come up in every single conversation we've had. And, that word is almost meaningless now, right? Like, what is it? It's so subjective depending on what everyone's individual priorities are. I guess, we usually ask this at the end, but I'm just going to ask you now because you brought it up. How do you define work-life balance, both for you personally and what ideally does it look like at BPI? Because you guys are a highly influential agency with heavy hitters, big clients. How do you define that both for yourself and for the agency?
It's funny. I don't think any of us think of ourselves as a highly influential agency. We still very much see ourselves as sort of a challenger and a startup, and we're
That's
almost always the smallest person.
That's healthy.
In every we're almost always the smallest group in every pitch we're in, and we're okay with that. We like that. Look, I mean, we have good snacks in our office. My kids like the snacks, so they like coming to visit. Look, there's no perfect balance,
right?
But I try to make it to the things that matter. I try to get them involved and excited about some of what we're doing. And my wife has her own business, so we have to take turns, and she's been extremely supportive of PPI over the years for a long time. So I'm due.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't worry, in our intro, we're going to cover off how impressive your background is and how impressive the background is of those who you work with, so that our listeners know, we've got Obama digital pioneers, Biden speechwriters, former Boeing spokesperson, which I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing in this current climate. But yes, it's an impressive lot. I'm going to ask one more follow up, and that's BPI is known for both having I think Provoke said it, like Washington policy smarts, Madison Avenue creative, Silicon Valley savvy. And would you say that you excel in all 3 of those, or is one more important than the other? And I ask this because it feels like all 3 of these things are really important in today's marketplace.
We don't think that any of those things exist on their own. I think we try to be the best of the combination of them, which I think is where the world sits today. So a lot of where I see the communications world, if you can spare a monologue for a second, is that the world used to be extremely siloed in stakeholder world. So marketing talked to customers about product, HR talked to talent about benefits, IR talked to the street about returns, et cetera. And it's because they care about really different things. And today, like the reason I see, for instance, Washington and, Silicon Valley or Madison Avenue, or Wall Street really related is that today, when you think about like the industries in the last 5 years, the next 10, AI, geopolitics, Russia, D&I, ESG, this coming election or the coming elections, not just in the US, but we have elections in the UK and the EU in the next month as well, or 6 weeks. All of the stakeholders care about the same issues. Their investor issues, their talent issues, their customer issues. And so what we find that our clients need is not someone who can do tech marketing over here or public affairs over here, but it's how do we help us wrap our head around these complicated issues in a totally integrated fashion. And that's sort of what we see as the opportunity.
Is that the new version of storytelling? Because we talked about telling stories and across the enterprise. Is that a fresher take? And do you use that kind of vocabulary of storytelling?
Well, not as much, but certainly, telling your, we talk about it in terms of telling your story before somebody else does, right? That's certainly in this world. And that was even true before AI and what's going on in search today. But that you can frame your story, or someone else is going to tell it for you, whether you want it to be or not. And so we talk about it more in narrative and in and sort of owning your reputation. But yeah, it probably is. Storytelling, I think, feels more marketing than we probably would talk about it as maybe slightly more C-suite or corporate affairs, but same concept for sure.
We've had a series of conversations where we talk about talent and kind of the genesis into the broader public relations world. How do people kind of get there? And we went on this tangent about politics, and that politics is obviously from my bias of having done campaigns, and obviously that's where you came from. When you look at the cadre of maybe your first or second layer of talent that you're bringing into BPI, is that a common thread? People that have been in and around campaigns, in and around the Hill or various capitals around the world, is that still a major thematic for you?
It's been really critical to us. We're actually trying to diversify now a little bit and get some more folks that come from really different backgrounds, particularly as we're in more countries. But yes, politics for us has been a terrific training ground. One, we think it's meritocratic, right? If you're capable, they force you into roles you are totally unqualified for.
Young for.
And it sorts out who can sink or swim. Yeah. And so it's great training. It puts you in high pressure environments very quickly. You build relationships with the media, with whether it's on the marketing side, with vendors or technology companies or leaders, very young. And in a lot of cases, you have real substantive depth. So it's not just the campaigns, but government. So folks out of Treasury, out of the USTR, out of Senate, out of the folks doing the regulating in particular have subject matter expertise that's really, really valuable. And frankly, we have a similar sensibility. What's interesting is also that if you think about who our clients are, there are a lot of, as we talk about the different silos coming together within, say, the C-suite of an organization, who is that person that's in charge? And there are different terms for it. A lot of people would say corporate affairs is sort of becoming the new umbrella. Another way to think about it is, who's the most senior political person in the building? And that's often who our client is. Both parties, we work for plenty of Bush Republicans in corporate America as much as we do for Obama Democrats or whatever it might be, Clinton Democrats. But I think one of the reasons we resonate even with equally with Republicans is that we sort of move at their speed and we speak their language. We've had similar experiences.
So when we're having this conversation with another agency owner, one critique came up, is that if someone grew up in kind of first or second job out of college and whatnot was campaigns, the systems of the back office of agency work, because we all take a lot of shortcuts in campaigns and expense reports are notoriously late. They're filled out on 3x5 cards, if at all. And so is that a tension that you've experienced, that folks coming up in that kind of fast go-go environment, but you need them to fill out, I'm not suggesting timesheets, but the structures of the back office that people kind of sort of bridle at that bit a little bit?
Look, we've all had to grow up. I've grown up a lot in this business. We've been doing it. This is our 15th year. I think we've all grown up, whether it's on work-life balance or embracing certain parts of operations. Yes, we're very fortunate that our COO is not from politics. So we've had to balance it out. We also had to balance out folks that have had the client experience, right? Because that's equally important and one of the big deficiencies of coming out of politics, particularly in politics, particularly at the presidential level. You don't have a problem getting someone to cover you. It's really about how does that coverage get shaped. There's too much coverage. And for most organizations in the world, it's the opposite problem. And so certainly, and even just how decisions get decided. And so having, I think, a mix, a lot of this is about the mix of how do we keep a political DNA, but have folks that have been chief communications officers or chief spokespersons or chief analytics officers or CHROs within an organization.
You had mentioned that you're looking to diversify beyond sort of politicos. So what are the gaps, in addition to some of the administrative stuff that Bill's talking about? What are some of the other gaps that you've noticed in folks that have more traditional political backgrounds?
Yeah, well, one of the things that's interesting, so last year in December, we made an acquisition of a firm called Bolt in Europe. So we have about 50 people across 6 countries. And a lot of them also have similar political backgrounds. It's not the partisan split is totally different. They have socialists, they have conservatives. It's a totally different landscape. And I think they're all pretty progressive in comparatively to U.S. politics. But, clearly there's a lot that we want to add. I think this is really about like if we're trying to build around the chief political person in a building or head of corporate affairs, and we're trying to crib a little bit from our old friend Jack Martin, we're trying to be sort of a first chair partner to our clients. We want to be the first phone call, right? And when we have to fight for that chair every day and earn it every day, it's not easy. We're not there. Every time we get closer to the chair, we realize there's another chair we didn't even know about, or someone else is really in that advisor role. So that's a journey that we're on. That's sort of a little bit of our North Star, if you will. But to do that, they're big parts of that C-suite that we are not the most credible in today, right? So we're certainly more within certain members of the C-suite. We're very comfortable in the government affairs, public affairs, corporate comms lane. We've gotten much more comfortable in the HR lane over the last 3 years, maybe. But we are not nearly as strong as we need to be in other members of the C-suite, notably the general counsel, where we're doing more and more, the CMO, as we do more in the Madison Avenue creative space. Though, again, we work for plenty of general counsels and plenty of CMOs, as well as the CFO in the financial space. So those are probably three big buckets that we're looking at over the next couple of years.
Are deals and transactions a big part of what you're doing? So that would be the more CFO side.
Well, actually, what I was going to ask about that I wouldn't related to that is you just did mention the Bolt acquisition, right? And we just kind of brushed over that. And I think that's something that our listeners would be really interested in. So I guess similar to what Bill's asking about transactions, M&As on the client side, can you tell us a little bit about what you learned from your own M&A?
Sure. So Bill, first to your question, we're doing some deal work, particularly on like approvals, less on more like the FinCom side today. Where I'm really interested is I think shareholder activism is getting really, really exciting over the next few years. And it looks a lot like political campaigns. And so naturally we're getting brought into that in different ways. In terms of our own space, learning the business side, I think has been, I never went to business school. I did with Bill a stint at WPP where I learned a lot and as well as a lot of what not to do, in terms of bureaucracy and corporate cultures, but have had some, been fortunate to have great mentors and to make a lot of mistakes and try to learn along the way. Buying agencies is really hard. I don't know why anyone invests in our space, or at least there are a lot of reasons to not invest in our space. Yeah. Right? Like the talent goes home at the end of the day. They don't have to come back. It's, these relationships are really fragile, both with clients and teams. And so to get, a merger to work, any kind of merger, whether it's what Burson's trying to do now at a huge scale or smaller scale, things like we're doing, or even smaller, even acqui-hires or that kind of thing. My view is that the biggest question is that, vision and culture have to be aligned, like really, really, really aligned, not like a little bit off and goes in slightly, you've got a sailboat behind you, not like a little bit off and you go over time in different directions. And then usually we discovered there are enough financial mechanics to align the team if that's true, but there's no financial mechanics to align the teams if those aren't true. And so we've learned a lot of lessons.
So I've heard this and we've seen, as Andrew, as well as anyone, there is a graveyard full of well-intentioned acquisitions where I sat down and interviewed both of the CEOs about how they were totally aligned, their values, their mission, and then fast forward 18 months, 2 years. And it's clearly that something went wrong, right? Where do you think that some of those watchouts are, and how are you avoiding those as you all are integrating Bolt into BPI? Yeah,
look, we've had the benefit of doing not a lot of M&A, and the truth is we are very interested in hoping to do a lot more, over the next, say, 24 months. But we have done a little bit. In 2016, we bought a group called Insight, which was with Ben LeBolt and Robert Gibbs' old company. And we bought a very small public affairs firm run by Scott Mulhauser as well, I think in 2018 or 19. So we have a little bit of experience in this. I think a couple things about acquisitions. One is I think you have to decide, are acquisitions necessary in the first place, right? And so I talk a lot about the difference between credibility and capability. And what I mean by that is if there's something we are credible in, we can probably build it. And that's going to be a lot safer, honestly, even if it's more costly short term. So something like media buying and targeting and data coming out of politics, I think we're extremely credible in. we can build in that function, even as we get into verticals like, say, television, which we're in now, but we weren't originally. We didn't need to go buy a firm to do that because we had credibility. In Europe, as an example, we had no credibility. We didn't know anything. And so it would have taken us a decade to get our client. And our clients, we're very fortunate to have some of the biggest clients and organizations in the world as clients, and we can't half-ass it.
Yeah.
If that's okay on a podcast.
You bet.
Like we can't like, we have, a person in Paris and a person in London. Like, we're not going to win anyone's European work that way. Like, we needed to get to credible fast. And so for that, it was worth the risk. And we were very fortunate to find a team we're very aligned with. In terms of other things about M&A, I think one, you have to believe that you can invest in them and you want to make them better. If you're hoping to extract value, like, they can do these 3 things for me, I think that's really dangerous. Like, you want to believe that you can make them better, you can add things to them and help and come into it with a helpful attitude. I think one of the things that I learned from WPP was all the dangers of earnouts. I want people to earn in. I want people who, the whole point is for people to, you're buying the talent. That's all you're buying. And you're really leasing the talent. And so how do you extend that lease as long as you possibly can? And so we've really tried to make sure that anyone we've worked with has hit every incentive that we've outlined. The last thing we want to do is to get to this place where people are missing their targets. The deal wasn't worth what they thought it was worth. They're frustrated. People start to leave. That's a disaster. You really want to help people feel great about the deal. And that's why, Ben LeBolt Gibbs is still with us. Ben LeBolt's the current White House communications director, but was with us until recently, long after, many, many years after that deal was through. So we hope that, we hope that's the case with Bolt, but with anything is that we want to design deals where people are excited about being with us long-term. We're not trying to maximize short-term.
How valuable is it? Because a lot of those names, the first 2 are people you knew. How valuable is it that the principal of the firm you're acquiring is a friend or a colleague, or you're aware of at kind of at a personal level, versus the colleague with the firm in London and they seem to match us, but I don't really know them? How much does the knowing matter?
Helps.
Yeah.
Helps a lot. Yeah. It just reduces risk. I did not know the Bolt team 2 years ago.
Okay.
At all. Not once, but there were referrals in common. We have clients in common, and we have people that we both trust that sort of vouched for one another. And I think that really accelerated the process. Trying to do cold speed dating, like via bankers, is very difficult.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time taking those pitches, and it is really hard for both sides. I think more for as a seller, it's terrifying.
Yeah.
Right. To realize that you may be, you're going to get half an hour to meet a potential either investor or owner, and that's tough. I don't think that many deals get done where there's not some personal relationship in practice.
Yeah, born over at least some period of time.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time chasing deals that don't happen. Like, most deals that I've went after have not happened.
Is that a big part of your you look at your calendar, your personal portfolio? Is that growth side is where you spend a lot of your time?
Yeah, I think we've reached that stage. I'm a big believer that you can't get too far from the business. So, I mean, all of our partners work on clients. I work on clients. But I also certainly have to spend, we refinanced with a new investor last year, and we did the Bolt deal. The 2 of those together was a huge percentage of my time. And certainly looking at either major hires or potential M&A is probably the biggest single item on my list this year.
Can I ask about what other external investment do you have?
So we went the PE route. I have lots of thoughts on that.
Yes, please share.
Yeah. So we had a situation where, look, if I never needed to take financing, I probably wouldn't have. But we were fortunate that we were cash flowing well. We always have. We just reached the situation where my original partners in the business are great friends of mine today. We're sort of part of the Obama senior team from 2008, who have their own businesses. And they were sort of my original partners in the business. They're terrific, but I think they always assumed we would be their digital firm, and we sort of outgrew that model. And so the folks that have joined since, that are really my partners in the business that I totally rely on, we're sort of the kids at the table in that relationship. And so we needed to sort of reset the deck, bring them in, move some other folks out, but very fairly. And by the time we sort of reached that conclusion, we unfortunately were worth something, and I didn't have any money. And so we really had to look to raise outside capital. And the truth is, at the time, that was originally in 2016, we were very fortunate to find private equity, and particularly a great sponsor in John Sabota, who was a firm out of Chicago, because people weren't really doing it back then, right, in the professional services space. It was very, mostly it was the WPs and then the Stagwells and some of the other sort of smaller holding companies. And we weren't ready for that, maybe one day, but we wanted to be independent. We just needed to have a different financial structure. We wanted to keep growing. So for us, private equity has been great. The good and the bad of private equity is they can't really, really help you. Meaning, like, don't expect them to find your next 10 clients, but also it's still your business. Like they don't know, they're not professional service experts. They're not public affairs experts. They don't claim to be. They're investors. And I'm fine with that trade-off. I want to continue to run the business. My partners want to continue to run the business. We have a vision. There's a lot we want to do. But over the last couple of years, if you look at least the public affairs space, and I think that's true for PR as well, less advertising, interestingly, there's been a massive influx over the last 24 months of PE funding into the space. They're paying higher multiples. The economics are better than what the holding companies can do. And the question is, can all these firms make it? My guess is no, for two reasons. One is the growth rates you have to sustain are hard to keep, are hard to maintain long term. And as you get bigger, like 20%, when you're small is not such a big deal. As you get bigger, that it gets a little more daunting. So that's a hard thing to do. The other reason is that when you sign up to have a PE partner, you're signing up for a fairly long-term commitment. And for teams like ours, we're very much a team and a partner group, and a senior, and even a broader senior team. You need to be in a position where that senior team can commit collectively, right? And so you're not just signing up for the hold period of the private equity investor. You're signing up for at least some of the next thing, because you're only sellable as a business or valuable as a business if they can sell it with the management. So you're signing up for probably at least 8 years, probably 10. When you take a private equity investment. And if you look at a lot of the leadership of a lot of the groups out there today, I don't think they want to sign on for another 10 years, like just from an age perspective. And so I don't, and everyone's trying to convince the market that the next generation is just as good. I don't really see that. And so I think there's going to be a massive consolidation, both between the combination of these firms needing to, the P firms wanting to exit in the next 3-4 years, not everyone having grown as much as they want, not everyone wanting to sign on for more PE, but also that, like, frankly, if there was this much PE money in the system, I doubt we would have ever made it to the size we are today. Because somebody would have found, like, any sort of like small to mid-sized shops, I think, are getting a lot of calls, because all the sort of mid-sized firms like ours that have taken funding are under a lot of pressure to do deals.
So back to your entrepreneurial journey. So you left the Obama campaign, started Bully Pulpit with a cadre of some partners, correct? In those days, were the aspirations then, and though that iteration of Bully Pulpit, the same as they are now? Obviously, you've grown the PE, you're 250 people, but as you sit there in the owner's chair with partners, was the long view similar, and did the WPP phase in the middle change your perspective on what the long view is?
No, one of the interesting things, because this is our 15th year, so we're gonna have a party. You should all come. And we've looked back at this a little bit. No, honestly, our goals are, if you look at our marketing materials then and our marketing materials today, they're shockingly similar.
Nice.
So what I mean by that is, like, we set out to take the lessons of politics and apply them to some of the largest and most impactful organizations in the world. That's very much still true. We set out to be first chair strategic partners to our clients, not a vendor. Very much still true. We believe strongly in outcomes, not effort, and the use of technology and data to help sort of precise targeting and ROI measurements. So we're not talking about bullshit or engagement metrics or that sort of thing. That's all really, really true. What's changed is the amount of spaces that we play in to accomplish those things, right? So obviously integrating sort of press and marketing was sort of the first, as we've added research and executive communications and writing and more of crisis and more obviously geographies and certain industries. So the scope has changed, but I think our goals are, extremely coherent. And also we've stayed in politics. Very few firms do that. Many great firms, Public Strategies, Gilder Park, on the left and others on different sides, most get out of it.
Yeah.
For one reason or another. And I think for us, we decided early, look, we didn't want it to be the dominant part of the business, mostly because that's a brutal business to run.
So that means actual campaign work when you say that.
Yes,
okay.
the exact electoral work.
Yeah.
It's brutal. It's a roller coaster. I talk about work-life balance. I can't do that anymore. We also want to provide, like, a lot of our team has been here 10 plus years now. We've been really fortunate to have a really stable group. We've grown it, of course, but that's been a lot of our advantage. And to do that, we need to have stability after the elections, and people need to keep growing and have more opportunities. But we do think staying at least a foot in politics just makes us smarter. We learn faster. We get more at bats. We get looks at a lot of talent. We get to know a lot of people.
Related to that. So, a lot of founders like yourself, right? I mean, start firms because you all were sort of pioneers in your space, right? I mean, in 2008, Obama's campaign, especially his digital game, was considered to be groundbreaking, right? And, the world has since caught up. So how do you make sure that you're staying on the forefront? Is that, the reason that you do want to stay involved in politics? Because, strangely enough, like since 2008, that seems to be where a lot of some of the more sort of groundbreaking strategies are being put into place first. So like, how are you making sure that you don't get sort of stuck in like 2008 in what was novel then?
That keeps me up at night for sure. We innovation is the ball game. We believe really, really strongly in that. We want to work for the most sophisticated organizations in the world. And a lot of other people, it turns out, want to work for them too. And a lot of them want to do it for less money. And so we better be good. We better be on it. And so, I do believe that only the paranoid survive for sure. And we're sufficiently paranoid, I think, if nothing else. A couple things. One is we're very fortunate to have a great team on some of the data side of the house, led by Mike Schneider, one of my longtime partners, who leads sort of our some of our technical and product work. We've had engineers in-house for a long time. We build software, we build tech. A couple things. One is, I think when you look at most firms and then you look back 10 years later, most of them are really built in the image of the founder or founders, founding team. They have like a single dominant service or thing they're known for. Maybe they started as pollsters or maybe they started as comms people, but they've added some creative or some digital or something a little bit along the line. I think one of the biggest differences about us that's really helped is and this goes to the fact that I was like 12 years old when we started the business. And we didn't, we were not household names or anything. No one's name's on the door. I think that's really, really important. I think and I have great friends who have eponymous firms, but I do think it's a different thing. Yeah. And a lot of them are in the process of taking their name off the door.
We're changing it to initials or something like that are hard to find.
Yeah, belatedly.
Yeah.
But also it's allowed us to, when we think about expanding beyond our core service, we were never trying to find sort of a subsidiary service. We've been trying to find who are the best people that can be world-class in their area, and how do we bring those things together in a totally more equal team-like way. And so I think that's really helped us continue to evolve, right? And so if you look at us on any 2-year period, I think we're a pretty different firm year over year. So we've built evolution and innovation into the DNA. It's not like we've been doing something for 10 years and then, oops, social media came along and we had to switch. We've been sort of fortunate there, or oops, AI came along and we had to switch.
Right.
Like every year we're very constantly trying new things, whether it's technology, services, sectors, we're reading, like we're learning. That's a really important part of the culture.
We've talked about with owners talking about, I've got a wisdom business. We're high strategy, low tactics. It's the way people have sort of described their businesses. Do those resonate with you, or can you do one without the other in the BPI model?
Plenty of people do really successfully. I'm not saying some of them have better margins than us. So, some of those may be great models.
Yeah.
Some people certainly get away with charging a lot more than we do, just doing wisdom. So kudos. I haven't figured that one out yet. Where we try to play is, look, I do think there are people that play at sort of the top wisdom business. There are plenty, as I explained, like the big firms. I think there are plenty of people that play at the tactical business. We try to sit at that combination of those two things. We try to think and do at speed, right? We're not just the advisory businesses, the Brunswick Cineos, or just the big PR shops or ad shops. We try to be in that hybrid. I also think if you think about most agencies, big agencies as a pyramid,
Mm-hmm.
The couple kind of wisdom folks and a lot of tactical, cheaper folks to bill on accounts. I think the challenge on that is what do clients really want to pay for?
Mm-hmm.
And my view is that if you think about, this is a gross generalization, but if you think about most of what the in-house teams look like on our clients, they're the middle of the pyramid, right? Maybe they're in their 30s or 40s. They're really solid. They're generalists. They're project managers, and they've got a brutal job managing the internal politics of this organization, staying on top of all their divisions. But what do they? So as a result, I think they undervalue the middle of the pyramid in our team, right? They don't really want to pay for a lot of process and project management, though they desperately need it. But what do they want to pay for? They want to pay for what I talk about as more of like an hourglass model, meaning they do want the wisdom part. They do want a wide strategic bench. And I would put more things under that bench than traditional strategy, creative strategy, data strategy, like real, some
analytics,
real
interpretation, putting meaning behind all that stuff. Yep.
Totally.
Yep.
It's I think they want a broad senior bench to be able to work with on different expertise or subject matter areas. And they want, and I think what we're trying to do is to match that with deep vertical expertise in things like communications and marketing, like advertising, creative, data, right? And the middle was a little bit harder, but like, do we need serious data scientists? Absolutely. Or great creatives or great art media experts? Of course we do. Like we're very much in the doing business.
Yeah.
But we have to mirror those two things together with as little of the middle, I think, as we can.
It could potentially create, because I've often thought about that hourglass model. It creates a talent management problem, because where does that 25 go when they're 40 or 30 go when they're 40, or what pick your age range? But there's a challenge there from a talent progression standpoint.
Yep. There's a challenge on a lot of fronts.
Yeah.
One is, is resourcing, in that, like, when we're dependent on a lot of specialists.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes if we're short one person, it can become a big problem because there isn't someone else here with that skill set.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to roles. A couple of things on talent management. One is we have to create more respect and opportunity for individual contributors. Not everybody, I think one of the biggest mistakes traditionally big agencies make is to take anyone who's talented and make them a manager. And so all of a sudden you find yourself as the general manager of New York or something, or DC, and you're not working on clients anymore.
Yeah.
Or you didn't really want this job. But you're who the clients want on their staff.
Yeah.
Right.
know? And so we got to find roles for individual contributors. Some of our most senior people really want to be individual contributors. And that's okay.
Yeah, the distinction you make that is they're not leading groups. They're not leading teams of people. That's just clarifying what you mean by an individual contributor in your context.
Yes, or if they are, they can lead really niche groups. Like they don't have to be the head of a sector or a practice. They could do something very narrow in tax policy or in data science, and just be and just sort of break the title structure to the roles a little bit.
Do you think that, so looking at this hourglass model, right, where you would, even at the bottom, right, have a lot of junior level folks, do you think that great talent emerges quickly and you're able to identify sort of who you want to fast track quickly? And I asked this with a little bit of context. I think you had just said that, you had started this agency when you were 12. But we actually, if you look at the entrepreneurs in our business, right, a lot of them did start fairly young. Melissa Wagner Zorkin, Brett Warner, there's a long list of folks who started their entrepreneurial journey fairly young. With that in mind, do you feel like you can identify great talent quickly, pretty early in their careers?
Not as much as I want, sometimes. But I think, we've tried to be a place where, we have to also balance that with equity and a lot of other types of questions, right? So, there are a lot of, there's bias that goes into that question. Yep. There's, so we've really tried to balance that, right? With a couple things that hedge, right? One is, we've adopted transparent pay bands, right? So it's not like, yes, and we probably lose out on one or two superstars that we can't keep up with in the interest of, of equity and making sure that we're able to keep the bulk. I do think, though, the culture is the most important part of talent, meaning I think our culture both attracts, we're very, very, very fortunate, and we try hard to protect our culture in that I think our culture attracts really talented folks who want to work really hard and are passionate about the work, and rejects very quickly folks that for whatever reason, this is probably not the best use of their time. This is probably not a pleasant place to be if you're not excited about the work we're doing. And if you're not curious about the world and technology and our space. And I think those people often choose to leave very quickly or ideally figure that out in the interview process before they come.
Can we stay on equity for a second? Because I think BPI has been a leader in this space. I think your team is, I believe the last number I saw was 37% non-white, which is well above industry averages.
Absolutely.
Two questions on that. Number one, sort of how intentional have you been to reach that number? And do you have any ideas and tips for entrepreneurs, especially those that are maybe in growth mode and maybe feel like DEI and equity is a nice to have, not a must have? Can you tell them why, from your perspective, you think, assuming you think it's a must have, why it's a must have and how you've been able to achieve that?
Well, I really appreciate you asking and sharing that. I do think it's a must have. By no means do I think we've solved anything. I think it's a journey we're much in the midst of. I mean, I started the firm largely with a couple white guys, so we're never going to be perfect on this. We have a lot of work to do, but we've been very intentional about it now for a long time. We've made a lot of progress. Certainly we've made a lot of on pure diversity numbers. We made a lot of progress. We have a lot more to do there, particularly at the senior most levels, and are continuing to do that. But we also have a lot of other metrics we set for ourselves in the inclusion and belonging space, in terms of what is the experience like? Are we making sure that the opportunities are equitable? And frankly, how ideally, what is the impact that the work that we're doing is having on equity beyond our little, we're a pretty small enterprise. What is the work, on, for instance, but I do think we have clients that can really impact the country and the world on how things like D&I are talked about in corporate America. We work for groups like 110 that are basically an association with most of the Fortune 50 around skills first hiring, particularly the focus on minority Americans. That started by Ken Fraser and Ken Chenault and Ginny Many. So we think we're in a position to have sort of an undue potential impact. A couple of things. One is, we're in the communications business, so we better damn well understand the communities we want to communicate to. And we still have plenty of work to do that. We do not yet represent America in many, many, many ways, certainly in ethnic diversity, in experiences, in geography. There are a lot of ways. There are all sorts of ways to cut this, and our own people are helping us. And they've been changing for us even how we, all the different ways they want to identify. We've renamed many of our ERGs to be more inclusive. Even the stat on non-white that you raised, there are a lot more of our folks here that would like to be included in different parts of diversity stats but that's sort of the one the industry uses. So that's sort of the one we've had to use, but it's probably not the preferred one that most of our people would like. It doesn't really incorporate LGBTQ Americans or now global. It doesn't, there's a lot that's not fully, I think included in there. And look to how we've certainly made a lot of progress particularly in the last 5 years. We had, I think it's something we work at very hard. We don't always get it right 100%. We will continue to make plenty of missteps along the way. But I do think it's something, first of all, you got to be committed to doing. There's a real economic component to that. It is, and pay bands make it harder, not easier, truthfully. I think this is a bit of a misnomer in our space, in that particularly at we've gone the pay band route for a lot of important reasons. I do think it makes diverse recruiting harder at a mid-level and higher, where often it's our non-white talent that is above the pay band, like above market, which is great.
Is that because there's a premium on non-white? Yeah.
Yes, 100%, which is great. But that's something we're trying to wrestle with. And how do we do that in an equitable way for everybody? And we have to model it, right? So, folks like Bradley Akiburo, who's one of our partners, or Adam Hodge, one of our managing directors, having the hardest part for us has been in leadership. And that's been probably it's easy to do the tactical things. I'm on the board of the LeGrant Foundation, which I strongly would recommend anyone to engage with or apply for their scholarships. We do a lot with certain schools like Howard here in Washington, to try to make sure we have, at the younger levels, more, both of those groups, can be great at the graduate, college graduate kind of level. The work we do helps also, right? I think the mission-driven element gives us a huge advantage because there's a lot of exciting topics that people want to engage on. I think that
people want to be involved with that. They want to touch that
question. So those are all really helpful, but I don't think there's like a fix to this or an easy way to do this. And the hard part is, it's not just recruiting any particular group. It's then you've got to make the experience great, and they have to want to stay and they have to want to grow with the enterprise.
That's great.
And, and we've had some clients steal diverse talent from us. There is a real, there's a real demand, and that's a good thing.
So we need to wrap up our time. And so thank you, as always. Just a great conversation. I'm glad we got a chance to reconnect. But let's, in the last question, just pivot to you and your leadership. And so is there one thing in your leadership you want to change or want to improve, but now's not the time to do it? Is there something that you want to modify, but it's not now for you?
Most things. Look, I don't know if I'm the most traditional in my leadership style. I really think we try to be really honest with people. We try to level with them about where we are. We try to sort of show, not tell, in terms of doing the work, showing what good looks like. Some of the best advice I've got on leadership is to be like so boring that you're predictable and you don't need to be in the room. And just be totally consistent to the point of like repetition to death. I think I excel at boring, which is one part. I think we've put in the work. We're at an awkward stage. We're sort of a teen. I talk about us as being a teenager. So we're 15 years old and we were sort of lanky. Like we're a little awkward. So we're not really big enough to have some of the things that, just from an infrastructure perspective, from a how am I spending my time perspective, that I would like, that I think we need. We need help on many, particularly the back office, front of things. We brought on a great COO. We've had a great CFO for a long time, but like, do they have the teams they need? We now need in-house legal. Now we're global. We need systems. I have to, I very much need to change what we're investing in sort of the operational side of the house and how I'm spending my time. Can I fully do that? Would there even be would our clients want that? Would our people even want that? No, because we're not even necessarily ready to be a bigger place. But it's going to have to be an evolution.
Yeah. Great place to talk.
And management by committee gets harder as you grow too. I mean, that's something we're very much wrestling with. We have a great partner group. It's an essential part of what makes us different. But already we have to divide and conquer more, right? We can't do things in 10-person groups.
That's awesome. Great place to finish. Andrew, thank you. Wonderful conversation. I look forward to being able to share this, and I think we'll probably get some great feedback and may want to sort of revisit with you again as you cross after your 15th, maybe after your 16th birthday. We'll get a chance to take
I hope to still be here for a long time. Yeah. We don't have any other plans.
That's awesome.
So appreciate you having me.
That's awesome.
what a great conversation with Andrew. And Aarti, I'm really glad we got to share him and you got to spend more time with him. He's certainly a dynamic leader. I remember the first time I met him, he just has an energy that's not going to blow the doors off of things, but there's a steady, smart confidence that's there. And that's that point he made about he got the advice from a mentor to be the most boring leader that he can be. So that's something that's been on my mind since we talked to him.
I think that's really true. There was a panel discussion that I was a part of once, or I wasn't on stage. I think I was just in the audience, but that was a takeaway that if you want to be a good leader, be reliable, be the person that they know will show up, that will be available, when the crisis matters. That matters so much more than being like the kind of bravado, the guy with all the bravado and like showing up and doing the big flashy things. No, that consistency is so important. And I think that tied into another point he made was like, no one's name is on the door at BPI, right? And I think that is something that we're seeing more consistently with agencies as they're this new generation of agencies, right? And it is just another tell that, right? Leadership isn't about ego. It's not about having your name on the door. It's much more than that. I'm going to ask one more thing to add one more thing to that. And just talking about, as you're bringing on new leaders, whether it's through, M&A or whatever, one of the things I love that he said was the danger of an earnout, and how when he brings on new leaders and new people at the senior levels of the firm, he wants them to earn in, right. And design deals built for the long term versus the short term.
Yeah, no, I thought that was great. And that you listed off so many of the benefits that are fabulous of being a boring leader. The other one, I've got a coaching client where that has been a topic of our conversation, is that he wants to separate from the business a little bit, not be in the business as much and work on the business. And I said, be a boring leader so your team knows exactly the way you would answer different situations, repetitive. It's almost like a system. It becomes a process. Oh, well, that's the way he does it. That's the way he does it. That's the way he does it. That's a great benefit.
Yeah. And, the other thing that he was saying, as like, again, this is boring. It's not as flashy as, oh, we need to build a new capability. Let's go out and see who we can buy. And this idea that Andrew mentioned about credibility versus capability, right? And that it is usually safer to build than it is to buy. But you have to also know when you have the credibility to build something or when it's a necessity to buy. And I see so many agency owners that are just like, oh, we need digital, give me a name of a bunch of digital. And they just want to go out there versus like doing that really hard work of saying, is this safer for us to build internally? And how do we do that? And it's not going to be an overnight. There's not going to be a payoff overnight. It's going to be something that you have to commit to in the long term. But again, it's a slow and steady.
No shortcuts. There's no shortcuts to any of this stuff.
Yes.
It's really not. Everybody's looking for it. There is no shortcut to this
yes.
stuff. Yeah.
There is no shortcut. Especially today, we're operating in a pretty challenging business environment. Yeah. So especially today. Yeah.
Well, awesome conversation with Andrew. Hope you got a lot out of it.
Oh, actually, I want to say one thing about the DEI.
Yes.
Obviously, he made a great case from a business perspective, which, that again, the data proves that diversity, and it's not just diversity, right? It's also, and we talked about this as well, it's also about inclusion and equity. You can have a diverse pipeline, but once you diversify your organization, you need to make sure that it's built for not just one kind of person, but for all kinds of people. But one thing that he said that was interesting was the pay bands. That pay bands have actually made hiring diverse harder, because oftentimes in our business, non-white candidates are at a premium, right? Because most agencies at this point see the need to diversify their workforce, which I thought was really an interesting point that I would love at some point to follow up with either Andrew or somebody else and ask them how that's impacted their business. So yeah, only the paranoid survive. I thought that was an interesting point that he made, because we've had, I believe it was Armando, that he doesn't focus on the competition, that instead he likes to have a single focus on his business. And Andrew's taking a very different perspective of like, no, you kind of have to always be looking over your shoulder and seeing what else is happening.
Yeah. Great conversation. A lot to learn. I'm pretty confident we'll probably revisit our conversation with Andrew a couple of times. And hopefully we'll have another conversation with him down the road. So as always, Aarti, great to be with you. Thanks for another terrific conversation.
Yes, always.
And I hope everybody enjoyed this episode of the Heart and Science of Creative Leadership podcast. We'll see you again soon. Thanks so much.